Womb transplants for transgender women will soon be possible, doctors say. 45 years after the world's first test tube baby was born, surgeons are preparing for another historical first, transplanting a womb inside the body of someone born male. Several teams are actively working to make uterus transplants for transgender women a reality, according to an article published in the medical journal Fertility and Sterility, with the first such procedure likely to happen within the next few years, if not sooner. A team at Ohio's Cleveland Clinic, the first in North America, to transplant a uterus from a deceased donor into a woman born without one, authored the paper. If the anatomical challenges in transgender women can be overcome, and surgeons have said none seem insurmountable, uterus transplants would make it possible for trans women to gestate and give birth to a child. Currently, the baby would have to be delivered by cesarean section. In some cases, the donor womb might come from a transgender man, someone who was born female who was transitioning to a male and who no longer desires a uterus. A team from Temple University Hospital's Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery program wrote last May, it appears that uterus transplantation in transgender female patients will soon become a reality, and so we must begin to preemptively start planning for that. On February 15th, 2022, Joel de Souza became the first transgender parliamentarian in the Caribbean country of Trinidad and Tobago. In January 2021, President Joe Biden signed the executive order on enabling all qualified Americans to serve their country in uniform. This executive order ended the previous Trump order that had banned transgenders from serving in the military. On November 3rd, 2020, Sarah McBride became the first transgender state senator elected in America. On October 1st, 2020, Petra de Sutter was sworn in as one of 7 deputy prime ministers in the government of Prime Minister Alexander De Croo, becoming Europe's first transgender deputy prime minister and the most senior trans politician in Europe. In June of 2020, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in favor of protecting employees from workplace discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity. In March of 2020, Chris Mosier became the first openly transgender male athlete to ever compete in an Olympic trial alongside other men. In December of 2020, Chile's gender identity law came into force, allowing people to change their legal name and gender without the need of sex reassignment surgery. In November 2019, transgender community leader Lauren Polito raised the transgender pride flag over the California state capitol for Trans Day of Remembrance. Reportedly, this was the first time the transgender flag was raised over a state capitol building in the United States. In April of 2019, the Trump administration announced on April 12th that transgender people were no longer allowed to enlist in the United States military if they ever had medically transitioned or had a history of gender dysphoria. Currently, serving individuals were required to serve under their gender assigned at birth. This legal action became known as the trans military ban. In February 2018, Laverne Cox became the first openly transgender person to appear on the cover of any cosmopolitan magazine. Also in 2018, Transgender Health reported that a transgender woman in the United States breastfed her adopted baby. This was the first known case of a transgender woman breastfeeding. She was able to breastfeed after taking a course of drugs and breast pumping. Many doctors agree that this research could lead to more cases of transgender women breastfeeding in the future. In 2013, Nikki Sinclair came out as transgender, thus becoming the United Kingdom's first openly transgender parliamentarian. In 2012, San Francisco voted to become the first U.S. city to provide and cover the cost of sex reassignment surgeries for uninsured transgender residents. In 2010, Phyllis Frye became the first openly transgender judge appointed in the United States. Also in 2010, Guinness World Records recognized transgender man Thomas Beattie as the world's first married man to give birth. In 2006, Kim Koko Iwamoto became the first transgender official to win statewide office in Hawaii. In the year 2000, the transgender pride flag was first shown at a pride parade in Phoenix, Arizona. In 1998, Dana International became the first trans person to win the Eurovision Song Contest, representing Israel with the song Diva. In 1992, Althea Garrison was elected as the first transgender state legislator in America and served one term in the Massachusetts House of Representatives. It was not publicly known that she was transgender when she was elected. In 1980, the Gender Identity Disorder in Children diagnosis is introduced in the DSM-3 medical textbook. Prior to the DSM-3's publication in 1980, there was no diagnostic criteria for gender dysphoria. In 1976, Renee Richards competes in the US Open. She is one of the first prominent transgender athletes in the United States. In 1975, Minneapolis becomes the first city in the United States to pass trans-inclusive civil rights protection legislation. In 1974, Chile allows a trans woman, Marcia Torres, to legally change her name and gender on the birth certificate after undergoing sex reassignment surgery, becoming the second country in the world to do so. Also in 1974, Angela Morley became the first openly transgender person to be nominated for an Academy Award when she was nominated for one in the category of Best Music Original Song Score Adaptation for The Little Prince. In 1972, Sweden becomes the first country in the world to allow transgender people to legally change their sex and provides free hormone therapy. In 1966, the Compton's cafeteria riot occurred by transgender women and Vanguard members in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco. This incident was one of the first recorded transgender riots in the United States history, preceding the more famous 1969 Stonewall riots in New York City by 3 years. In the aftermath of the riots at Compton's, a network of transgender social, psychological, and medical support services was established, which culminated in 1968 with the creation of the National Transsexual Counseling Unit, the first such peer-run support and advocacy organization in the world. In 1954, the gender transition of Roberta Colwell, a British pilot during World War II, is reported internationally by the Associated Press. She also appeared that month on the cover of Picture Post, a then popular magazine in the United Kingdom. In 1950, Christine Jorgensen, originally named George William Jorgensen Jr., captured international headlines in the early 1950s as the first person in the United States to undergo a successful gender reassignment operation. In the year 1919, in Berlin, Germany, the Institute for Sexual Research is built. The institute soon became a sought-after address for local and foreign scientists, academics, and politicians. For Berlin residents, it became known as an institution providing counseling and treatment for physical and psychological sexual disorders, as well as, in particular, for sexual transitions. In 1933, Nazis burned and destroyed the library of Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute for Sexual Research. During Hitler's reign over Germany, trans people and what we would call LGBTQ plus people today were sent to concentration camps, along with Jews, the disabled, and many more. In Germany, 1906, Karl M. Bayer becomes the first transgender person to undergo sex reassignment surgery. He became one of the first transgender people to gain full legal recognition of his gender identity by having a male birth certificate issued in January of 1907. In 1895, the Circle Hermaphroditos, the earliest known transgender organization in the United States, was reportedly founded in this year. In 1876, Francis Thompson, a former African American slave who had 10 years earlier testified before the U.S. Congress on having been raped during the Memphis riots of 1866, amid the Reconstruction era in the former Confederate States of America, is arrested for being a man dressed in woman's clothing. In 1836, Mary Jones, a transgender African American sex worker, is placed on trial in New York City after allegedly pickpocketing a client. The case received significant press attention, and she was depicted in a published lithograph entitled The Man Monster. In 1781, Jens Andersen of Norway, assigned female at birth but identifying as male, was imprisoned and put on trial after getting married to Anne Christine. After the wedding, Anne Christine privately told the minister she thought her husband might be a woman. The marriage was annulled and Andersen was accused of sodomy. This was in the general sense of fornication against nature, which included a wide range of forbidden sexual acts, including those between two women. By law, any form of sodomy would be punished by fire and flames, more commonly known as execution by being burned alive. Anderson was examined, imprisoned, and interrogated. In the trial, Anderson was asked, "Are you a man or a woman?" To which was answered, "He thinks he may be both." Luckily, Anderson managed to escape prison before the trial reached a verdict, and he was never seen or heard of again. In 1776, the public universal friend, or earlier known as Jemima Wilkinson, was an American preacher born in Cumberland, Rhode Island. After suffering a severe illness in 1776, Jemima Wilkinson claimed to have died and been reanimated as a genderless evangelist named the Public Universal Friend, and afterward shunned both birth name and gendered pronouns. In androgynous clothes, the Friend preached throughout the northeastern United States, attracting many followers who became the Society of Universal Friends. In 1629, Thomas Hall, born Thomasine Hall, was an English intersex person and servant in colonial Virginia, who frequently wore female clothing, had a liaison with the maid which provoked public controversy, in which Hall was subjected to a physical inspection, and the case reached the quarter court at Jamestown, which ruled that Hall was both a man and a woman and must dress in male and female clothing simultaneously. In 1586, Barbara Brunner, who lived in Switzerland, was discovered to be a male under female clothes and was burned at the stake on May 28th of that year. Also on the same day, a man was also burned for sodomy, but it is unknown if the two executions were related. The executions were recorded in the Chronicles of Johann Jacob Wig. In 1542, Alvar Nunes Cabeza de Vaca documents same-sex marriages and men who dress like women and perform the office of women but use the bow and carry big loads among a Native American tribe in his publication, The Journey of Alvar Nunes Cabeza de Vaca and His Companions from Florida to the Pacific, 1528 to 1536. In 1347, Rolandino Ranchea lived in Venice in the 14th century. Although he was born with male genitalia, Rolandino also had full breasts and had a very feminine appearance. As an adult, he married a woman, but the marriage fell apart because he couldn't have an erection. After his wife left him, Rolandino moved into a relative's house in Padua. Another guest in the house, tempted by his feminine features, made a pass at Rolandino and had sex with him. From that point on, Rolandino decided to start living as a woman. He changed his name to Rolandina, moved back to Venice, and worked as a female prostitute. In Venice, Rolandina attracted a huge number of clients. Rolandina also attracted the attention of authorities, who forced Rolandina to undergo a medical examination, and it was seen that the upper part of the body was feminine, hairless, and with clearly feminine breasts. But from the navel down, there was a penis and two testicles and no vaginal cavity. Rolandina was even later brutally tortured. While being tortured, she was asked to report who had relations with her, and she refused because she said, quote, My life has never really been happy except for a few moments, moments in which someone has looked for me and loved me for what I really am. Rolandina was found guilty of sodomy in a Venice court and was executed by being burned at the stake. Of 218 to 222, Roman Emperor Elagabalus' reign begins. According to Cassius Dio, who was a Greco-Roman statesman and historian, Elagabalus delighted in being called the mistress, wife, and queen of one of his lovers. The emperor wore makeup and wigs, preferred to be called a lady and not a lord, and offered vast sums of money to any physician who could provide the emperor with a vagina. For this reason, the emperor is seen by some writers as an early transgender figure and one of the first on record as seeking sex reassignment surgery. In the year 98, Tacitus wrote in Germania that priests of the Swabian subtribe dress as women to perform their priestly duties. In the year 54, Nero became emperor of Rome. Nero married two men, Pythagoras and Sporus, and during these legal wedding ceremonies, Sporus wore emblems and clothing that was usually worn by the wives of the Caesars. The earliest recorded accounts of transgender people took place between year 1 and the year 100 during the early Roman Empire. A famous philosopher, otherwise known as Philo of Alexandria, and Marcus Manilius, an early Roman astronomer, provided descriptions of transgender people during the early Roman Empire. Philo stated expending every possible care on their outward adornment. They are not ashamed even to employ every device to change artificially their nature as men into women. He also attested that some members of this group, to that end, had their penises removed. Why exactly is it some people feel as if they were born the wrong sex and will go through so much hardships and discrimination to become the person they know they are inside their brains? Well, to figure this out, in my opinion, we have to go even further back in history, before human beings, to the creation of some of the first life forms on Earth. Transgender people have been around since the very beginning of humanity, and if early humans such as Neanderthals or cavemen had kept written records, I'm sure there would have been stories of transgender people existing even during this time period as well. In the beginning, God, or the Big Bang, created the very first life forms, many of which are intersex. Many life forms have physical characteristics intermediate between a true male and a true female of its species. Intersex species have existed for hundreds of millions of years, and they change their gender usually due to a change in the environment. Several species of fish can change their gender. One species in particular is the hawkfish, which can switch back and forth between being a male or a female. Some species of frogs, slugs, snakes, butterflies, coral reefs, several types of fish, and some insects can also switch genders. All living organisms on Earth share a common genetic heritage, so it seems to be the natural order of things and part of nature's plan that some humans also change genders. Intersex life forms have existed since the beginning of vertebrate life forms on Earth over 500 million years ago.